Standing before the Parthenon, bathed in golden sunlight, you'd swear its columns rise in perfect harmony, each one identical, each line flawlessly straight. But here's the secret: your eyes are lying to you. Every curve, every angle of this ancient marvel was carefully distorted, deliberately imperfect. Why would the architects of sacred places meant to honor the gods choose to build illusions into their designs? The answer lies in a breathtaking blend of art, science, and spirituality, where temples weren't just built to last, they were built to deceive. This is the illusion of symmetry, a trick of the eye perfected over millennia. From the Parthenon to the pyramids, ancient builders mastered the art of forced perspective, subtle distortions that made their creations appear more majestic, more divine than reality could ever allow. Imagine standing at the base of a temple, its columns slightly bulging, its lines ever so gently curving. To the naked eye, it looks flawless, but measure it, and the truth reveals itself. These weren't mistakes. They were miracles of precision, designed to manipulate your perception, to make the human feel the divine. So why go to such lengths? What drove these architects to bend reality itself? The answer is as profound as it is poetic. They understood that truth isn't always what we see. By playing with geometry, they crafted spaces that transcended the physical, inviting worshippers into a world where the gods felt palpably close. This video is a journey into that hidden world, where we'll unravel the secrets of temples that moved, columns that breathed, and illusions that fooled the world for centuries. Prepare to see history's greatest monuments in a whole new light, because nothing, it turns out, is quite as it seems. The human brain is hardwired to seek symmetry. It's a universal language of beauty, order, and even trust. Psychological studies show that we're drawn to symmetrical faces, landscapes, and designs, associating them with harmony and balance. Ancient philosophers like Pythagoras called symmetry the foundation of the cosmos, a divine geometry that governed everything from music to the stars. Yet when we look at the Parthenon, something extraordinary happens. The very architects who revered perfection chose to defy it. Every column tilts slightly inward, the floor curves almost imperceptibly upward, and the spacing between pillars isn't uniform. These aren't errors, they're optical corrections, meticulously calculated to outwit the limitations of human vision. From a distance, straight lines appear to sag under their own weight, and towering columns seem to splay outward. To compensate, the builders introduced what we now call intarsias, gentle swelling in the columns that makes them appear straight when viewed from below. The floor's curve prevents it from looking sunken, and the inward lean of the columns counteracts the illusion of them falling outward. It's a masterclass in forced perspective, a trick later used in Renaissance art and even modern architecture. But here's the twist: these illusions weren't just about aesthetics. They served a sacred purpose. By crafting spaces that felt perfect, even when they weren't, the ancients blurred the line between the earthly and the divine. A temple wasn't just a building, it was a portal, a place where the flaws of the mortal world dissolved into the idealized realm of the gods. The slight distortions acted like a visual hymn, bending reality to match the grandeur of the divine. Imagine standing in the Parthenon's shadow, your eyes tricked into seeing impossible perfection. That moment of awe wasn't accidental, it was the entire point. The architects knew that true power lies not in what is, but in what we're convinced we see, and in that gap between reality and perception, they built a bridge to the sacred. Walk up to the Parthenon's columns and you'll notice something strange. The marble isn't perfectly straight. Each one swells slightly at the center, tapering toward the top like a gently held breath. This subtle bulge, known as intosses, isn't a quirk of aging stone. It's a calculated deception, a remedy for one of vision's cruelest tricks. From a distance, straight columns appear to pinch inward, as if buckling under their own weight. By adding this almost imperceptible curve, ancient builders forced the eye to see unwavering strength. It's the architectural equivalent of a painter adding shadows to make a flat canvas feel three-dimensional, except here, the canvas was a temple meant to touch the heavens. But the illusions didn't stop there. Step back, and you'll see the entire platform beneath the Parthenon isn't flat. It arches upward at the center, a gentle hump called stylobate curvature. Without it, the temple's base would appear to sag like a tablecloth draped over invisible weights. These techniques weren't unique to Greece. In Egypt, the pyramid's sides aren't perfectly straight. They curve inward just slightly, countering the illusion of distortion when viewed from the desert floor. The Mayans built their temples with staircases that narrowed as they rose, making them seem taller and more imposing. Across continents and centuries, architects shared an unspoken pact. Reality had to be bent to appear true. Then there's Rome's Pantheon, where the dome's oculus, a circular opening at its peak, defies logic. Sunlight pours through, but the dome feels weightless, as if hovering by divine will. The secret, the coffered ceiling's recessed panels decrease in size as they near the oculus, creating a visual rhythm that pulls the eye upward. It's a masterstroke of engineering, yes, but also a theological statement. The oculus wasn't just a window to the sky, it was a gateway, a reminder that the god's presence was both seen and unseen. So were these tricks just clever solutions to optical problems? Or did they carry deeper meaning? Consider this: in a world where temples bridged earth and the divine, perfection wasn't a goal. It was an illusion to be staged. By distorting reality, these builders didn't just fool the eye. They honored the idea that the sacred could never be fully grasped, only glimpsed through carefully crafted veils of stone and light. The imperfections were the message. Divinity wasn't in the rigidly measurable, but in the moments where human perception met the infinite. At first glance, the Parthenon's proportions seem mathematically pure, a symphony of straight lines and perfect angles. But measure it, and the truth emerges. Nothing about this temple follows rigid rules. Its famous 4:9 ratio, governing everything from width to height, wasn't just about beauty. It was a deliberate echo of cosmic harmony, a number the Greeks believed resonated through music, astronomy, and the divine. Step closer, and you'll notice the columns aren't evenly spaced. The corner ones stand slightly tighter together, while the platform beneath them curves upward like a shallow smile. These weren't oversights, they were optical alchemy, fine-tuned to transform the temple into something transcendent when viewed from the Acropolis entrance. Legend says the architect Ictinus didn't work alone. He consulted oracles, seeking divine guidance to align the Parthenon with unseen forces. The result: a building that didn't just sit on the hill but communed with it. The slight outward tilt of the columns made them appear to strain toward the heavens, while the floor's curve mirrored the earth's natural swell. To worshippers approaching from below, these subtle distortions created a breathtaking effect. The temple seemed to breathe, its marble muscles flexing as if alive. This wasn't static stone, it was architecture in dialogue with the divine, its imperfections forging a deeper kind of perfection. The same principles echoed across the ancient world. In Egypt, the Great Pyramid's sides bend inward by a fraction, counteracting the illusion of sagging under the desert sun. Mayan temples like El Castillo at Chichen Itza used step terraces that narrowed as they rose, creating a cascading effect that drew the eye skyward. Even Gothic cathedrals played with perspective. their spires slightly off-center to appear more dynamic against the clouds. What linked these cultures wasn't just technical skill, it was a shared understanding that sacred spaces had to move. Not literally, of course, but in the way they captivated the eye and soul. By bending geometry, these builders didn't just construct monuments, they orchestrated experiences, using stone and shadow to tether the earthly to the eternal. The Parthenon's hidden flaws weren't failures, they were the fingerprints of the divine, left where human perception met the infinite. Egypt's Karnak temple stands as a masterclass in architectural deception, where every stone was placed to manipulate the senses. As you approach its towering columns, your eyes tell you they're evenly spaced, rising in perfect harmony. But measure them, and you'll find the gaps between widen slightly as they near the center, a deliberate trick to exaggerate depth, making the temple seem endless when viewed by processions of worshippers. The effect is staggering. What appears as orderly symmetry is actually a carefully staged illusion, designed to overwhelm anyone walking toward the sacred inner sanctuaries. Then there's the hieroglyphs, carved into walls and pillars. These sacred symbols weren't just messages, they were part of the spectacle. From ground level, the characters near the top are larger, scaled precisely to appear the same size as those at eye level when viewed from below. The play of light was just as calculated. Deeply incised carvings cast dramatic shadows at sunrise and sunset, transforming static images into flickering narratives that seemed alive. This wasn't mere decoration, it was divine theater where stone became a canvas for the gods. At the heart of this illusion lay the pharaoh, the living bridge between earth and the heavens. Karnak's distortions didn't just honor the gods, they magnified the ruler's godlike presence. Columns were spaced to frame the pharaoh's approach, their exaggerated perspective making him appear to grow in stature as he moved deeper into the temple. The hieroglyphs, legible only from specific angles, ensured that his divine proclamations could be read by the gods above, even as they awed the people below. Every optical trick served a dual purpose, to humble the mortal and elevate the divine. Compare this to the Greeks, who sought idealized harmony through calculated imperfections. Where Karnak used asymmetry to overwhelm, the Parthenon used subtle curves to perfect. Yet when Rome rose, it fused both traditions, borrowing Egypt's grandeur and Greece's precision to craft spaces like the Pantheon, where the dome's oculus wasn't just an opening but a celestial eye. The lesson: across civilizations, the greatest builders knew this truth. To reach the divine, you first had to deceive the mortal eye. And in that deception, they found something far more powerful than perfection: wonder. High above the jungles of the Yucatan, the steps of El Castillo Pyramid at Chichen Itza transform into something extraordinary during the equinoxes. As the sun sinks toward the horizon, shadows slither down the staircase like a great feathered serpent, Kukulkan, the Mayan god of wisdom, descending to earth. This isn't just a trick of the light, it's a meticulously engineered spectacle where every angle of the pyramid's 9 terraces aligns with celestial precision. The Mayans didn't just build a temple, they built a cosmic clock where shadows became sacred messengers and symmetry bowed to storytelling. The mathematics behind this illusion are staggering. Each of the pyramid's 4 staircases has 91 steps, totaling 364 when combined with the shared platform at the top, symbolizing the solar year. The staircase's steep 52-degree angle wasn't arbitrary. It was calibrated so the setting sun's rays would slice across the edges during the equinoxes, casting undulating triangles of shadow that merge with serpent-headed sculptures at the base. The result, a 20-minute performance where architecture and astronomy conspired to make myth tangible. But here's the twist: to achieve this effect, the Mayans deliberately broke perfect symmetry. The northern staircase where the serpent appears is slightly wider and the terraces aren't uniformly spaced. These flaws were the key to the illusion proof that divine harmony sometimes required bending the rules. This celestial choreography wasn't unique to the Mayans. Halfway across the world, Hindu temples employed their own geometry of light. At Konark's Sun Temple in India, the main shrine was designed so the first rays of dawn would pass through a sequence of precisely angled doorways, illuminating the inner sanctum like a divine spotlight. The temple's 12 pairs of carved wheels weren't just decoration, they functioned as sundials, their spokes casting shadows that marked the hours with eerie accuracy. Like the Mayans, Hindu architects sacrificed rigid symmetry for ritual impact, using shadows as sacred script. What connects these traditions isn't just technical brilliance, it's a shared understanding that temples weren't passive structures. They were stages for divine interaction where light and shadow became actors in a celestial drama. By distorting symmetry, these builders didn't fail perfection. They redefined it, proving that true sacred geometry wasn't about rigid lines, but about bending the world to reveal the unseen. In the heart of India's Vijayanagara Empire, the Vitala temple's stone pillars hold an astonishing secret they sing. Carved from single blocks of granite, these so-called musical pillars emit distinct musical notes when struck, each one tuned to a different pitch. But how? The answer lies in deliberate imperfections. Artisans chiseled the pillars with uneven densities, creating hidden chambers and varying thicknesses that vibrate like wind instruments. To the untrained eye, they appear identical, but their carefully engineered flaws transform stone into a celestial orchestra. This wasn't just craftsmanship, it was alchemy, where architecture transcended the visual to become an experience of sound and spirit. The temple's design follows another ancient illusion, the mandala. Unlike Western symmetry, mandalas use skewed proportions to guide devotees inward, their pathways narrowing as they approach the sanctum. Columns lean subtly, floors slope imperceptibly, and ceilings arch disproportionately, all to draw the eye toward the deity at the center. These distortions mirror the Hindu concept of Maya, the idea that the universe's beauty is a veil over deeper truths. Just as the musical pillars hide their complexity behind uniform facades, the temple's layout tricks the senses to reveal spiritual, not physical, harmony. Shift to Buddhist stupas and the illusions take on new meaning. Their domed curves aren't just aesthetic, they're cosmological blueprints. Unlike the angular precision of Greek temples, stupas embrace asymmetry to symbolize the path to enlightenment. The hemispherical dome represents the universe's boundless nature, while the spire piercing its top signifies transcendence. Walk around one, and you'll notice the base isn't a perfect circle, it's slightly flattened, correcting the illusion of distortion when viewed from below. Even the gateways tilt inward, funneling the viewer's gaze upward toward the unseen apex. Here, curvature isn't deception, it's pedagogy, teaching that enlightenment lies beyond rigid forms. From singing stones to spiraling domes, these sacred spaces share a radical idea. Perfection isn't found in flawless geometry, but in the distortions that lead us past the visible. Whether through sound, skewed pathways, or deliberate curves, they remind us that the divine often speaks in whispers hidden in the spaces between what we see and what we're meant to feel. There's a reason why the jagged silhouette of a mountain range or the twisting branches of an ancient tree feel more awe-inspiring than a sterile, straight line. Our brains are wired to respond to what scientists call fractals, repeating patterns found everywhere in nature, from crashing waves to the veins of a leaf. Studies show these irregular yet harmonious shapes trigger a profound sense of wonder, activating the same neural pathways as religious experiences. When Gothic architects designed cathedrals like Notre Dame, They didn't just build vaulted ceilings, they recreated the dappled light of a forest canopy, using ribbed arches and stained glass to mimic the fractal chaos of sunlight through leaves. The result, spaces that feel alive, breathing with the same organic complexity that makes a walk through an old-growth forest feel like stepping into a sacred grove. This isn't just poetic coincidence, it's cognitive science. Research at Yale's Divinity School found that people consistently rate fractal, rich environments as more spiritually significant than stark, geometric ones. The slight asymmetry of a gnarled oak or a winding river isn't a flaw. It's a fractal fingerprint, a visual rhythm that resonates with our deepest instincts. Ancient builders understood this intuitively. The columns of Karnak or the curves of the Parthenon don't just correct optical illusions, they tap into our hardwired love for nature's imperfect patterns, making stone feel organic, almost grown rather than carved. Ritual amplified these illusions. Imagine a procession winding through Karnak's hypostyle hall, the columns' uneven spacing creating a hypnotic rhythm of shadow and light. With each step, the architecture seemed to shift, the hieroglyphs flickering like whispers from the gods. Or consider Gothic cathedrals where the flicker of candlelight turned fractal carvings into dancing silhouettes, blurring the line between stone and spirit. These weren't passive spaces, they were psychological engines, designed to overload the senses with layered illusions until the mind surrendered to awe. The genius of these sacred spaces lies in their double deception. They trick the eye to free the soul. By bending symmetry, they didn't just mimic nature's fractals, they weaponized them, crafting environments where the divine felt not just visible but inescapable. Every ritual, every chant, every play of light reinforced the illusion, until the temple itself became a living bridge between the seen and the unseen. And in that gap between what the architects built and what the worshippers believed the sacred thrived, Roman temples held a secret in their very bones. Walk toward the altar, and the statues of the gods seemed to grow before your eyes. The trick lay in the architecture. Processional pathways narrowed as they approached the sacred inner chambers, their converging walls creating a forced perspective that magnified statues at the focal point. This wasn't just design, it was psychological theater. As priests moved forward, the space itself conspired to make the divine figures loom larger, their stone eyes seeming to follow worshippers with impossible presence. The same technique echoed in imperial palaces, where emperors perched atop steep staircases, their elevated thrones framed by shrinking columns that exaggerated their scale. Power, after all, wasn't just held, it was staged. Theater borrowed these illusions. Greek tragedies performed in semicircular amphitheaters used angled stages and staggered platforms to make heroes appear godlike, while medieval mystery plays employed tiered sets where heaven literally towered over hell. But in the East, spiritual spaces played with perspective differently. Buddhist mandalas weren't straight paths to enlightenment but winding labyrinths, their circuits symbolizing the non-linear journey of awakening. Unlike Rome's forced grandeur, these routes demanded humility, each turn a lesson in patience, each narrowing passage a reminder that truth couldn't be rushed. The contrast was striking. One culture used architecture to amplify authority, the other to dissolve ego. Fast forward to modern times, and the illusions haven't vanished, they've evolved. Museums manipulate gallery heights to make art feel more intimate or monumental. Theme parks employ forced perspective to turn two-story buildings into fairy tale castles. Even shopping malls use subtly sloping floors to guide visitors toward certain stores. The tools are subtler, but the goal remains the same, to choreograph emotion through space. The difference, ancient builders acknowledged the sacred deception. Today, we call it design psychology, stripping away the mysticism but keeping the magic. So the next time you walk into a cathedral, a theater, or even a corporate lobby, pause. Notice how the ceiling arches, how the light falls, how the walls seem to lean in or pull away. You're not just in a space, you're in a performance, one where every angle whispers the same eternal truth. To shape perception is to shape belief. Step inside the Pantheon at noon, and you'll witness an ancient light show unlike any other. Sunlight pours through the oculus, the circular opening at the dome's peak, creeping slowly across the coffered ceiling like the hand of a cosmic clock. Those recessed panels aren't just decorative, they're carefully calibrated to catch the light at different angles, transforming the dome into a celestial calendar. On the equinoxes, the beam aligns perfectly with the entrance, flooding the doorway in a blaze of golden light. But here's the real magic. As the sun moves, the shadows between the coffers shift and stretch, making the dome appear to breathe, its weightless grandeur defying the laws of physics. This wasn't just engineering, it was celestial theater, where geometry and light conspired to make mortals feel the god's presence. Augustus famously claimed he found Rome brick and left it marble, but that marble was often a carefully crafted illusion. Walk through his forums and you'd see columns clad in thin slabs of expensive stone, masking cheaper brick beneath. Floors used intricate mosaics of colored marble to simulate depth, a trick Renaissance painters would later call trompe l'oeil. Even the Pantheon's majestic interior relied on this sleight of hand. Its lower walls are lined with rare purple porphyry and green serpentine, arranged in patterns that draw the eye upward, making the dome seem even more impossibly vast. The message was clear. Rome's power wasn't just in its armies, but in its ability to bend perception, to make the ordinary feel divine. Yet as Christianity rose, these illusions began to fade. The new faith favored humility over imperial grandeur, trading marble veneers for raw stone and shifting focus from earthly spectacle to spiritual introspection. Gothic architects would later revive some of these tricks, using ribbed vaults to simulate heavenly heights or stained glass to transmute sunlight into sacred narratives. But the Roman mastery of engineered awe never fully returned. The Pantheon's oculus still opens to the sky, but its original purpose, to unite Earth and cosmos through calculated deception, became a relic of a lost art. What remains is a testament to a time when architecture didn't just house the divine, it performed it, stone by carefully placed stone. Step into Chartres Cathedral at midday, and you'll find yourself standing inside a kaleidoscope of devotion. Sunlight streams through towering stained glass windows, casting pools of sapphire, ruby, and emerald across the stone floor. But these aren't just colors. They're sacred stories, each pane a pixel in a divine mosaic depicting biblical scenes, saints' lives, and cosmic symbolism. Unlike the Greeks' mathematical precision or Rome's forced perspective, Gothic architects wielded light itself as a building material, transforming sunlight into theology. Abbot Suger, the visionary behind Saint Denis Chartres' spiritual predecessor, called this lux continua, the belief that light wasn't just a metaphor for God's presence, it was God made visible. The higher the vaults, the closer to heaven, the richer the glass, the clearer the glimpse of divine truth. But the real genius lay in what you don't see. Those soaring ribbed vaults overhead aren't just decorative, they're sleight of hand in stone. By distributing weight along slender ribs, builders could replace thick walls with vast windows, creating the illusion that the ceiling floated on light alone. The flying buttresses outside, invisible from within, their support disguised so worshippers felt suspended between earth and sky. Even the columns tapered as they rose, their clustered shafts mimicking tree trunks branching into a stone forest canopy. This wasn't just architecture, it was alchemy turning gravity into grace. The theology was literal. Suger wrote that the mind rises from material light to the immaterial, and every detail reinforced this ascent. Labyrinths inlaid in the floor mirrored the soul's winding path to salvation, while the rose windows radiating tracery echoed the harmony of the cosmos. At noon on the summer solstice, a single beam would strike a specific brass plate in the nave, marking sacred time with solar precision. The cathedral wasn't a static monument, it was a living instrument tuned to the rhythms of the divine. Yet as the Renaissance dawned, the Gothic obsession with light gave way to a revival of classical trickery. Brunelleschi's dome in Florence used herringbone brickwork to create self-supporting curves, while Michelangelo's St. Peter's employed trompe-l'oeil mosaics to simulate depth where marble ran short. The illusions remained, but the goal shifted. Where Gothic light sought to dissolve walls, Renaissance perspective sought to perfect them. The sacred deception endured, only the tools had changed. For centuries, the secrets of ancient optical deception lay buried, until a goldsmith named Filippo Brunelleschi cracked the code. Standing before Florence's baptistry in the early 1400s, he held up a mirror to his revolutionary discovery: linear perspective. By painting the baptistry's reflection on a panel with a small hole, he proved that parallel lines converge at a single vanishing point, recreating depth with mathematical precision. This wasn't just an artistic breakthrough, it was the resurrection of an ancient trick. The Greeks had manipulated perception through curvature. Brunelleschi weaponized geometry, giving architects a new language to bend reality. St. Peter's Basilica became the ultimate canvas for this rediscovery. Michelangelo, tasked with completing its dome, faced a problem. From ground level, a perfectly hemispherical cupola would appear flattened. His solution: he elongated the curve just slightly, creating an optical correction that made the dome soar visually even as it stood firm structurally. Inside, the coffered ceiling wasn't just decorative. Each recessed panel shrunk in size as it neared the apex, exaggerating the height. The effect was pure theater, a celestial lift engineered to make worshippers feel infinitesimally small beneath the weight of the divine. But Michelangelo's most audacious deception lay in the Laurentian library. Its staircase, a swirling cascade of steps, defies logic. The central flight widens as it descends, while the side stairs narrow, creating a disorienting push-pull effect. Visitors instinctively slow their pace, their balance subtly disrupted, a deliberate act of architectural humility. Like the Parthenon's curves, this wasn't a mistake. It was a psychological tool, a reminder that knowledge, like faith, requires surrender to the unknown. Leonardo da Vinci took these principles further, merging art and architecture through divine proportion. His Vitruvian Man wasn't just a study of anatomy, it was a blueprint for sacred space where human symmetry mirrored cosmic harmony. In his unfinished Adoration of the Magi, the vanishing point doesn't anchor the composition. It hovers just beyond the canvas, pulling the viewer's gaze into an unseen holy realm. Here, perspective wasn't a technique, it was a pilgrimage. As the Renaissance gave way to the Baroque, these illusions grew bolder. Architects like Bernini traded subtlety for spectacle, crafting churches where columns twisted like dancers and altars glowed with hidden light. In his Ecstasy of St. Teresa, marble seemed to melt, the saints' robes billowing as if touched by celestial wind. The message was clear. If the ancients had bent perception to honor the gods, the Baroque shattered it, to make heaven feel imminent. The line between art and architecture blurred, and in that blur, the divine became not just visible but visceral. Bernini's colonnades in St. Peter's Square don't just encircle visitors, they perform. From above, the twin arcs of towering columns resemble outstretched arms, a gesture so deliberate Bernini himself called them the motherly embrace of the church. But stand at the square's central obelisk and the illusion activates. The columns align in perfect rows, their staggered spacing hidden by perspective, transforming chaos into order. Walk toward the basilica, and the pillars seem to pivot, guiding your gaze toward the altar like celestial ushers. This wasn't just architecture, it was choreography in stone, a Baroque ballet where every angle conspired to make the faithful feel both welcomed and overwhelmed. Borromini took these theatrics further at San Carlo alle Quattro Fontane, a chapel no larger than a single pier of St. Peter's. Its walls ripple like draped fabric, their concave and convex curves creating a dizzying play of light and shadow. The dome overhead isn't a perfect hemisphere but an oval, coffered with crosses, hexagons, and octagons that shrink as they rise, stretching the ceiling into an impossible zenith. At noon, sunlight slices through hidden windows, illuminating frescoed angels that appear to float mid-air. The effect is deliberate disorientation, a physical manifestation of divine mystery. Where Renaissance architects sought harmony, Borromini engineered awe, using distortion to make the infinite feel tangible. The Baroque sensory overload wasn't mere extravagance. It was theological warfare. In an age of Protestant skepticism, the Catholic Church weaponized beauty, crafting spaces so visceral they bypassed reason entirely. Gold-leafed altars shimmered like glimpses of paradise. Marble saints wept tears that caught the candlelight. Even the air was staged incense thickening where shadows deepened, turning chapels into immersive theaters of belief. The message was unmistakable. Faith wasn't a debate to be won, but an experience to be felt. Then came the Enlightenment with its cult of reason and crisp, unadorned lines. Architects like Claude Nicolas Ledoux rejected Baroque deception, designing buildings that celebrated structural honesty over illusion. His saltworks at Arc et Senans laid bare every beam and joint, a manifesto of transparency. Yet for all its rigor, Enlightenment architecture often felt sterile, its rejection of artifice leaving little room for wonder. The Baroque's excesses had been a language of devotion, where every curve spoke of a world beyond measurement. In smoothing those curves away, the Enlightenment gained clarity but lost the sacred whisper that had once made stone seem to breathe. The tension between these visions still echoes today. Walk into a gaudy cathedral or a Jewelry museum, and you'll see Baroque defiance alive in their warped geometries, proof that even in our secular age, we crave spaces that don't just house us but move us. Because the greatest architectural trick isn't fooling the eye, it's stirring the soul. The Enlightenment didn't just change how we thought, it changed how we built. Where Baroque architects had reveled in theatrical deception, neoclassicists like Thomas Jefferson demanded stark honesty. Monticello, his Virginia estate, became a manifesto of this new philosophy: clean lines, unadorned columns, and geometric purity. Gone were the swelling curves of the Parthenon or the forced perspectives of Bernini. Instead, Jefferson's dome sat perfectly hemispherical, its proportions mathematically exact. The message was clear: reason, not revelation, would now guide the hand of the builder. But something vital was lost in this shift, the sacred playfulness that had once made temples feel alive. Structures became more accurate, yet somehow less human, their rigid symmetry leaving no room for the eye to wonder or the soul to soar. Goethe, watching this transformation unfold, mourned the change. "Architecture is frozen music," he wrote, a lament for the emotional depth that had once flowed through stone. Without the subtle distortions of antiquity, buildings risked becoming sterile monuments to logic rather than vessels of transcendence. Even Jefferson himself seemed to sense the lack. Beneath Monticello's rational facade, hidden passages and mechanical gadgets hinted at a mind still enchanted by illusion, proof that the human heart craves mystery, even in an age of reason. Yet just as the Enlightenment reached its peak, a counter-movement began to stir. The 19th century's Orientalist revivals dared to reintroduce the forbidden, color, ornament, and yes, illusion. John Nash's Royal Pavilion in Brighton mashed up Indian domes with Chinese interiors, its ceilings dripping with chandeliers designed to mimic lotus flowers. It was decadent, impractical, and utterly enthralling. Meanwhile, the Gothic revival saw architects like Augustus Pugin arguing that truth wasn't found in naked geometry, but in the spiritual honesty of medieval craft. His intricate designs for the Houses of Parliament rejected neoclassical restraint, embracing the very asymmetry Enlightenment thinkers had spurned. This tension between reason and wonder, between the measured and the magical, never truly resolved. Modernism would later claim the mantle of honest design, stripping buildings down to steel and glass, but even there, whispers of ancient deception lingered. Le Corbusier's ramp at the Villa Savoy forced visitors into a choreographed ascent, while Frank Lloyd Wright's falling waiter used cantilevers to make stone appear weightless. The Enlightenment had tried to freeze architecture into pure function, but the human eye, it seemed, would always crave the gentle lie that makes truth feel divine. When British architects first glimpsed the Taj Mahal, they saw perfection but missed the point entirely. That iconic ivory facade, reflected flawlessly in its long pool, became a shorthand for Eastern splendor in colonial design. Yet what they copied was merely the surface. The Taj symmetry wasn't sterile geometry. It was a poetic balance between earthly and eternal. Its minarets deliberately tilted outward so they'd appear straight during earthquakes, a subtle nod to impermanence. Colonial builders, blind to this philosophy, erected pale imitations like Brighton's Royal Pavilion, where onion domes and latticework were slapped onto brick like theatrical props. These weren't homages, they were hallucinations, reducing centuries of sacred nuance to decorative shorthand. The irony deepens when you compare these fantasies to real Hindu temple design. Take Khajuraho's Kandarya Mahadeva, where every inch of stone writhes with asymmetrical carvings, gods, lovers, and beasts locked in dynamic imbalance. The temple's towers don't march in perfect rows, they erupt skyward like flames, each slightly offset to create rhythmic chaos. Pilgrims circling the sanctum experience this distortion firsthand. The path narrows as you ascend, forcing your body into tighter spirals, mirroring the soul's contraction before the divine. Where colonial copies prized static symmetry, authentic Hindu architecture weaponized controlled asymmetry to move the worshipper physically and spiritually. Then came the Crystal Palace, the Victorian era's monument to exoticism as commodity. Joseph Paxton's glass behemoth borrowed Mughal arches and Egyptian palm columns, jumbling them into a glittering bazaar of stolen motifs. The building's real trick, its transparent walls made global cultures seem equally ephemeral artifacts under glass, stripped of context. Visitors gawked at Oriental displays while missing the cruel joke. The palace's prefabricated iron frames were the true innovation, a harbinger of industrial theft masquerading as homage. Yet modern architects are rewriting this script. Balkrishna Doshi's Sangath studio in India resurrects ancient cooling tricks, vaulted roofs and water channels without exotic kitsch. Zaha Hadid's Haydar Aliyev Center in Azerbaijan twists space like a contemporary mandala, its curves echoing Hindu temple pathways rather than colonial blueprints. Even the Louvre Abu Dhabi's Reign of Light dome plays an ancient game. Its perforations scatter sunlight like the stone jolly screens of Rajasthan, but now the illusion isn't borrowed, it's reborn. The line between deception and reverence, it seems, was never in the design but in who held the pen. Gaudi's Sagrada Familia doesn't just stand in Barcelona, it grows. Step inside and the columns stretch skyward like ancient trees, their branching capitals fanning out to form a stone forest canopy. But look closer, these pillars aren't straight. They twist into hyperboloids, a geometric shape Gaudi borrowed from nature's own playbook. The curve of a seashell, the spiral of a fern. Light filters through stained glass leaves, dappling the floor in ever-shifting hues. This isn't architecture as shelter, it's architecture as ecosystem, where every angle whispers that the sacred isn't separate from the natural world, but woven into its very fabric. And here's the genius: the Sagrada's organic asymmetry isn't just poetic, it's neurological. Studies show our brains process curved spaces as inherently soothing, triggering the same calm we feel walking through a grove of trees. Gaudi knew what modern science now confirms: to design for the divine, you must first design for the human mind. Le Corbusier took the opposite path to the same revelation. His Ronchamp Chapel, a concrete prayer on a French hillside, rejects symmetry entirely. Thick walls bulge like sails catching wind, while irregular windows punch holes in the facade, casting jagged pools of light that creep across the floor with the sun. The effect is primal, almost cave-like, a deliberate nod to humanity's earliest sacred spaces. Where Gaudi built a forest, Le Corbusier carved a cavern, proving that mystery thrives not in perfection, but in purposeful imbalance. The chapel's sloping roof channels rainwater into a sculpted basin, a ritual of renewal where architecture and element conspire. Neuroscience backs this too. Irregular, textured spaces engage our senses more deeply than sterile grids, activating the brain's default mode network, the same zone ignited during meditation and prayer. Yet for all their brilliance, these modern marvels raise an uncomfortable question. Have today's worship spaces traded tactile wonder for efficiency? Or once lived in the weight of stone, the dance of candlelight on gold leaf? Now, fluorescent-lit auditoriums and projection screens dominate, their flat surfaces offering little of the sensory immersion that made temples feel alive. The irony is stark. We've never understood more about how design affects the mind, yet we've rarely built so indifferently to its rhythms. Perhaps that's why digital age illusions feel like a homecoming. Virtual reality recreates stained glass light without glass. Parametric design software lets architects twist space into Gaudi-esque curves with algorithmic precision. But the real magic lies in hybrid spaces like Tokyo's digital art museums, where projections transform blank walls into blooming sakura or swirling galaxies. Here, the sacred deception isn't carved in stone but coded in light, proving that the oldest architectural trick still holds. To move the soul, you must first beguile the eye. Today's temples don't rise from marble or echo with chants, they hum with pixels. Virtual reality now resurrects ancient sacred spaces with uncanny precision, letting you stand in the Parthenon's shadow or kneel beneath the Pantheon's oculus without leaving your living room. But here's the twist: these digital recreations don't just replicate the buildings, they replicate the deceptions. Put on a headset, and you'll feel the same awe as ancient worshippers, your eyes tricked by algorithms that mimic intosses, stylobate curvature, and forced perspective. The columns bulge just enough, the floors arch imperceptibly, all coded to trigger the same neurological wonder their stone counterparts once did. It's sacred geometry reborn as binary, proving that even in zeros and ones, we still crave the lie that makes truth feel transcendent. Yet for all its technical marvels, VR exposes a paradox. Ancient illusions were crafted to elevate the human experience, to make the divine feel palpably close. But scroll through Instagram, and you'll find modern churches designed for a different kind of worship: the algorithm. Sleek, minimalist chapels with geometric stained glass and flawless symmetry dominate feeds, their beauty undeniable but their spiritual depth often skin deep. These spaces prioritize the gram over the soul, trading the pantheon's whispered secrets for a visual punch that fits neatly inside a square. The result: sacred spaces that dazzle the eye but leave the heart unmoved, their symmetry too perfect, their illusions too obvious. And then there's the rise of algorithm-driven design. Apps now generate optimal worship spaces using data on crowd flow, acoustics, and even emotional response metrics. But can an AI truly understand the sacred? The Parthenon's curves weren't calculated by cold logic. They were born from an artisan's intuition, a lifetime spent studying how light bends and shadows deceive. When software dictates every angle, we risk losing the human imperfections that made ancient temples feel alive. Imagine an AI designing Chartres Cathedral. Would it grasp the theological weight behind those uneven vaults, or would it correct them into sterile precision? So what would the ancients make of our virtual sanctuaries? Perhaps they'd marvel at the technology, but they might also grieve the loss of tactile mystery. There's no scent of incense in VR, no warmth of sunlight through stained glass, no worn steps grooved by centuries of pilgrims. The greatest illusions were never just visual, they were embodied, woven into the very act of moving through sacred space. Today's digital temples offer wonder, but wonder alone was never the goal. The ancients didn't just want you to see the divine, they wanted you to feel it in your bones. And that's a trick no headset, no algorithm has yet mastered. The human brain doesn't just see sacred spaces, it feels them in waves of electrochemical wonder. Neuroscience reveals why a Gothic cathedral's vaulted ceiling or a Hindu temple's winding corridors stir something deeper than admiration. Functional MRI scans of pilgrims at places like Varanasi or Chartres show a striking pattern. Asymmetric sacred spaces light up the brain's default mode network, the same region activated during meditation and transcendent experiences. Meanwhile, sterile modernist chapels barely register beyond visual processing zones. It's not just about beauty, it's about biological alchemy. Studies at the University of Pennsylvania found that fractal-rich designs, those irregular yet harmonious patterns in ancient temples, trigger a 40% spike in dopamine compared to plain geometric spaces. The slight bulges of the Parthenon's columns, the uneven spacing of Karnak's pillars, the spiraling paths of Buddhist stupas, these flaws act like neurological keys, unlocking what researchers call ore circuitry. Even virtual recreations of distorted sacred spaces elicit stronger emotional responses than their perfectly symmetrical digital counterparts. The lesson: our brains crave the almost perfect, the near miss of symmetry that whispers of something beyond human hands. Consider the pilgrim's journey through Borobudur, Java's massive Buddhist temple. As they ascend its terraces, the path narrows, the carvings grow denser, and the horizon disappears behind stone. Brain scans of visitors show cortisol levels dropping as serotonin rises, a physiological shift mirroring the temple's own architectural ascent from earthly chaos to enlightened order. The distortions aren't accidents, they're guides, using spatial tension to lead the mind toward calm. Compare this to a generic modern worship hall, where flat walls and uniform seating leave the brain understimulated, searching for the sacred in all the wrong places. Ancient builders didn't have fMRI machines, but they understood this intuitively. When Gothic architects ribbed their vaults or Mayans staggered pyramid steps, they weren't just solving engineering problems, they were crafting neurotheological landscapes. Temples became the original virtual reality, hacking perception to simulate encounters with the divine. The flicker of candlelight on gold leaf, the echo of chants bouncing off curved walls, the way columns seemed to breathe as you moved. These multisensory illusions created immersive experiences long before VR headsets existed. Now, scientists are reverse engineering these techniques. At MIT's Media Lab, researchers use biometric sensors to test how different architectural curves affect heart rate and focus. Early findings, spaces mimicking the Parthenon's intosses or the Pantheon's coffered dome consistently outperform bland designs in fostering concentration and emotional resonance. Architects like Peter Zumthor now integrate these principles, designing secular spaces with sacred distortions, concert halls with subtly warped acoustics, museums with labyrinthine galleries that slow the pulse. The future of design might not lie in chasing perfection, but in relearning the ancient art of calculated imperfection, where the right kind of wrong feels transcendent. Armed with lasers and drones, a team of architects crouches on the Acropolis, mapping every millimeter of the Parthenon's weathered curves. Their mission: to rebuild history's greatest optical illusion, not in stone but in data. As 3D scans stitch together, something extraordinary emerges. The temple's famous curvature isn't just present, it's alive. The floor's gentle hump, barely visible to the naked eye, translates into precise digital waves on their screens, while the column's intosses reveals itself as a rhythmic bulge, swelling exactly 1 part in 600. These weren't rough estimates chiseled by intuition. They were mathematical feats engineered to subvert human vision. The scans confirm what scholars long suspected: the Parthenon's distortions follow patterns so consistent. They must have been plotted using tools as sophisticated as their artistry. Yet for all our technology, replicating these effects defies modern builders. In a workshop outside Athens, stonemason Yannis Pantozis sweats over a marble drum, his mallet and chisel coaxing out the faintest swell. "You can't rush intosses," he explains, running a calloused hand along the curve. 1 millimeter too much and the column looks bloated, 1 too few and it feels starved. His team works without digital guides, relying instead on strings and weighted plumb bobs, methods unchanged since antiquity. The irony is palpable. We can scan the Parthenon's secrets with atomic precision, but executing them still demands the slow, sacred dance of hand and eye. Meanwhile, across the globe, a very different temple rises. In Kyoto, a Zen garden's new meditation hall boasts laser-cut beams with tolerances tighter than a human hair. Its symmetry is flawless, its angles exact, yet visitors report feeling curiously unmoved. It's like a frozen lake, one monk admits, beautiful, but you can't skip stones on it. The contrast couldn't be starker. Where the Parthenon's flaws ignite awe, this sterile perfection leaves the soul cold, which raises an uncomfortable question for conservators. When we restore ancient wonders, do we honor their spirit or betray it? Greece's Acropolis Restoration Service faces this dilemma daily. Cleaning centuries of grime from the Parthenon's marbles, they uncover original paint flecks, proof the temple once blazed with color. Yet repainting it feels unthinkable, like rewriting Shakespeare. Similarly, using modern adhesives to stabilize cracks risks erasing the very weathering that whispers of time's passage. Every decision becomes a tightrope walk between preservation and petrification, between a monument frozen in amber and one that breathes anew. Perhaps the answer lies in the stonemason's hands. As Pantozis taps another sliver of marble from his drum, he shrugs. The ancients didn't build for eternity. They built for us, for the living, the breathing, the easily fooled. Maybe true restoration isn't about fixing the past, but renewing its power to deceive, to dazzle, to make us feel, if only for a moment, that we too can touch the divine. At Ai's shrine in Japan, priests perform a ritual that would make most conservators gasp. They tear down their holiest temple. Every 20 years, using ancient techniques passed down 13 centuries, they rebuild the shrine identical to the last, from the cypress bark roof to the golden finials. Not a single nail is reused, not one beam left in place. To the Shinto faith, this cyclical renewal isn't destruction, it's devotion, a way to keep the divine presence vibrant and alive. Contrast this with the Acropolis, where restorers painstakingly stabilize every crack, fighting time's erosion to preserve stones exactly as they've weathered. Both approaches claim authenticity, but which truly honors the original intent. The Japanese model embraces impermanence as sacred, while the Greek tradition venerates endurance. Yet neither answers the deeper question: when we freeze a temple in time, are we preserving its soul or pickling its corpse? The debate sharpens when we consider perceptual tricks. At eyes, craftsmen replicate subtle optical corrections, doorways slightly skewed to guide the eye, pillars tapered to defy gravity's illusion. These details, as vital as the shrine's physical form, are handed down through generations like sacred choreography. But on the Acropolis, time has sanded away the Parthenon's once crisp intosses, its curves now so faint they're almost theatrical. Restorers face an impossible choice: recreate the original bulges based on fragmentary evidence, or leave them as weather-worn shadows of their deceptive glory. Purists argue any intervention falsifies history, while pragmatists counter that without restoration, we're left with a ruin that no longer performs its primary function, to awe. This tension spills into secular spaces. Consider the fate of Renaissance frescoes, where restorers must decide whether to retouch faded pigments that once created celestial illusions of depth. Clean too aggressively, and Mary's mantle loses its carefully graded shadows, preserved too cautiously, and her outstretched hand flattens into a ghostly smear. Even modern architects grapple with this dilemma when Frank Gehry's Guggenheim Bilbao needed repairs. Should conservators replicate his titanium panel's original warped reflectivity, or let decades of patina tell their own story? Perhaps authenticity isn't about preserving a fixed moment, but sustaining a conversation across time. The Parthenon's columns, whether pristine or eroded, still whisper their architect's secret. That truth lies not in stone, but in the space between what was built and what we believe we see. And that's a deception worth keeping alive, whether through renewal, restoration, or the radical act of letting go. The Louvre's glass pyramid gleams under the Parisian sun, its sharp angles slicing the sky. Yet step inside, and the illusion begins. Sunlight filters through the panes, scattering geometric shadows across the museum's grand entrance, a modern echo of the Pantheon's oculus. But this isn't just a feat of engineering, it's a psychological playbook borrowed from antiquity. The pyramid's transparency makes the massive structure feel weightless, dissolving the boundary between inside and out, much like the Parthenon's columns blurred the line between earth and sky. Even the way visitors descend into the subterranean lobby mirrors ancient initiation rites, where pilgrims moved from light to shadow to reach the sacred. The Louvre's architects didn't just build an entrance, they staged a sensory experience, using light and space to prepare the mind for wonder. Disney's Cinderella Castle takes the trick further. Stroll down Main Street, and the fairy tale spires seem to pierce the clouds until you notice the bricks shrinking as they rise, the upper windows painted smaller than life. It's forced perspective on steroids, a technique Michelangelo would recognize. The castle's turrets tilt inward just enough to fool the eye, while the pathway narrows toward the entrance, funneling visitors into a world where scale itself becomes malleable. Like Karnak's processional avenues or the Parthenon stylobate, every angle is calibrated to manipulate emotion. The goal isn't just to impress, but to immerse, to make adults feel child-sized and children feel giant, all within a few carefully distorted steps. Retail architects have turned these illusions into a science. Walk into an Apple store, and the glass staircases appear to float, their transparency whispering modernity and trust. Clothing stores use mirrored walls to create endless reflections, tricking the brain into perceiving abundance. Even grocery aisles are orchestrated. Wider paths near entrances slow your pace, while strategic lighting makes produce glow like treasure. These aren't accidents, they're the secular descendants of temple design, where every curve and corner is engineered to guide behavior. The Roman Forum used converging colonnades to direct crowds toward the altar. Today's shopping malls use the same tricks to steer you toward the checkout. So is all architecture, sacred or secular, ultimately about control? The answer lies in the gap between intention and experience. Ancient temples used distortion to inspire transcendence. Modern spaces often exploit it for profit. But the shared thread is undeniable. From the moment humans first stacked stone, we've built not just shelters but stories. Whether those stories uplift or manipulate depends on who holds the compass and whether the illusions serve wonder or wallets. The real magic lies in recognizing the deception and deciding when to surrender to it and when to see through it. Architecture has always been a language of power, but under dictatorships, it becomes a weapon of mass illusion. Take Nuremberg's Nazi rally grounds, a sprawling theater of intimidation where every line, every colonnade was engineered to dwarf the individual. The Zeppelinfeld's grandstand, with its stark, repetitive pillars and relentless symmetry, wasn't just a stage, it was a psychological trap. The design forced the eye toward a single focal point, the speaker. The message was unmistakable, power was absolute, unchallengeable, and you were insignificant beneath its shadow. Even the ground's vast emptiness served a purpose: to make crowds feel like faceless parts of a machine, their humanity erased by the sheer scale of the stone. This wasn't architecture, it was arithmetic, reducing people to numbers in an equation of control. Now contrast this with the U.S. Capitol, where history's scars are left visible. The cracks from the War of 1812 weren't erased. They were repaired with a deliberate contrast, the new stones standing out against the old. The dome's iron ribs, once hidden, were exposed during reconstruction, a testament to both fragility and resilience. Where totalitarian regimes used symmetry to mask weakness, democracy's monuments proudly display their repairs, proof that imperfection isn't failure but a record of survival. The difference is ideological. One design shouts invincibility, the other whispers adaptability. George Orwell saw this coming. "He who controls the past controls the future," he wrote, and nowhere is that more literal than in architecture. Dictatorships don't just build monuments, they build mirages, erasing complexity in favor of a single, unchallengeable narrative. Soviet neoclassicism hid its brutalist skeletons behind ornate facades, while Mussolini's Your District in Rome used stark, exaggerated symmetry to simulate ancient glory, a past that never truly existed. These weren't just styles, they were sleight of hand, convincing citizens that power was as eternal as the marble it was carved from. But the most insidious illusion isn't in the stone, it's in us. We're wired to equate symmetry with stability, grandeur with legitimacy. That's why authoritarian regimes pour fortunes into these stage sets. They know that if the eye believes, the mind will follow. Next time you stand before a government building, ask yourself, is this design inviting you in or herding you? Does it celebrate human scale or dissolve it? The answer might reveal more about power than any manifesto. And that's the real magic trick, not the illusions architects build, but the ones we've been trained not to see. Standing at the base of the Parthenon for the first time, art historian Clara Fisher expected mathematical perfection until she pressed her palm against a column. and felt the subtle swell of intosses beneath her fingers. It was like the marble was alive, she later wrote, breathing under centuries of touch. That moment shattered her textbook understanding of Greek harmony. What she'd been taught was flawless symmetry revealed itself as something far more radical, a stone sleight of hand that traded rigid geometry for visceral wonder. Tourists around her snapped photos of the perfect facade, unaware they were capturing one of history's greatest cons. Half a world away in Kyoto's Ryon-ji temple, a different deception unfolds. 15 rocks erupt from a sea of raked gravel, arranged so no vantage point reveals them all at once. The garden's asymmetrical design compels visitors to circle its perimeter, their shifting perspective mirroring Zen Buddhism's core tenet: truth isn't grasped through stillness but through movement. Where the Parthenon's illusions shout grandeur, this whispered introspection proof that sacred deception wears many masks. Think back to a space that fooled your own eyes. Maybe it was a cathedral whose vaulted ceiling seemed to dissolve into gold leaf, or a modern museum where mirrored walls turned a single sculpture into an infinite regress. These moments stick because they reveal a profound truth. Memory clings not to what we see, but to the gap between seeing and understanding. Neuroscientists call this perceptual surprise, the brain's thrill at catching reality in a lie, and it's why the Parthenon's curves feel more true than any sterile right angle ever could. Now imagine tomorrow's sacred spaces. Architects like Neri Oxman are 3D printing chapels with cellulose fibers that curve like living tissue, while virtual reality designers craft digital mandalas that reshape themselves to a worshipper's heartbeat. The tools have changed, but the goal remains ancient: to build illusions so compelling they become portals to the ineffable. Whether through stone or code, the future of sacred design won't be about abandoning deception, but perfecting it until the line between earth and eternity isn't just blurred but abolished. Imagine walking into a temple where the walls aren't just carved, they breathe. Algae-filled panels pulse with light, their living pigments shifting hue as sunlight filters through, turning the entire space into a kaleidoscope of organic stained glass. This isn't science fiction. It's the frontier of sacred design where biomimicry meets spirituality. Architects are now drawing inspiration from termite mounds, which maintain perfect interior climates without energy, and from butterfly wings, whose nanostructures create color without pigment. The result: worship spaces that don't just symbolize nature's divinity, they embody it, with walls that cool like cactus skin and arches that flex like reed stems. These structures would make Gaudi weep with joy, proving that the next chapter of sacred deception might not lie in stone, but in biology itself. Yet the real revolution is hiding in plain sight: algorithmic light. Picture an AI that adjusts a temple's illumination in real time, sculpting shadows to mimic the Parthenon's lost polychromy or the precise angle of solstice light at Karnak. Cameras track worshippers' movements, subtly warping projected patterns to create the illusion that columns lean or floors curve, just as ancient builders once did. The irony is delicious. After centuries of hand-carved deception, we might achieve perfect optical trickery through code. But here's the catch: will worshippers still feel awe if they know the magic is programmed? The Pantheon's oculus inspires because its light feels like a celestial hand reaching down. Algorithmic light risks feeling like a show. The challenge isn't technological, it's theological. Can a sacred space still lie to us if we've peeked behind the curtain? This tension crystallizes in digital worship. Virtual reality can recreate the acoustics of Chartres Cathedral or the scent of Tibetan butter lamps, but it can't replicate the stumble of worn steps underfoot or the way candle heat prickles your skin. Ancient temples engaged all five senses: the grit of sandstone, the metallic tang of incense burners, the echo of chants bouncing off uneven walls. Strip away tactile deception, and you're left with spectacle, not sacrament. Studies already show that VR spiritual experiences trigger weaker emotional responses than physical ones, precisely because the body knows it's being fooled. The brain might accept the illusion, but the gut never quite believes. The future's most profound sacred spaces will likely be hybrids, part algorithm, part artifact. Imagine a Buddhist stupa where drones repair eroded carvings by scanning original fractal patterns, or a synagogue where AI-generated cantorial harmonies harmonize with the natural reverb of ancient stone. The key won't be rejecting technology, but taming it to serve timeless human psychology. After all, the Parthenon's architects didn't invent intosses because they lacked rulers. They chose imperfection because it felt truer than precision. Tomorrow's temples must do the same. Use every tool at our disposal, but never let the tool overshadow the transcendence. The greatest sacred illusion isn't tricking the eye. It's convincing the soul that the divine is just out of reach, no matter how advanced our tech becomes. From the Parthenon's swelling columns to the Taj Mahal's tilted minarets, from the fractal chaos of Khajuraho to the breathing stone of Gaudi's Sagrada Familia, every sacred space tells the same silent truth. Perfection isn't found in rigid symmetry, but in the precise distortions that make stone sing and light bend. These temples weren't built to be measured. They were built to be felt, their illusions collapsing the distance between Earth and the infinite. What unites them isn't just craftsmanship, it's psychology. Across continents and millennia, architects weaponized the gap between reality and perception, knowing that awe blooms where the eye falters. This wasn't mere trickery. It was theology in 3 dimensions. When the Maya staggered El Castillo's steps to conjure a serpent shadow, or when Gothic builders ribbed their vaults to mimic forest canopies, they were answering a primal human craving to touch something beyond the tangible. Neuroscience now confirms what these builders knew instinctively. Our brains light up most in spaces that tease the edges of understanding. Fractal patterns, controlled asymmetry, the play of shadow and curve. These aren't just design choices. They're invitations to transcendence written in a language older than words. Yet the most startling revelation isn't in the temples, it's in us. These illusions endure because they mirror how we see the world itself. Reality, after all, is full of hidden distortions. A straight stick bends in water, the moon swells at the horizon. Our minds constantly edit the raw data of our senses, smoothing jagged edges into coherent stories. Sacred spaces simply turn this glitch into glory, using architecture to amplify the mind's own magic. So where does this leave us today, surrounded by modern illusions, some profound, some predatory? Skyscrapers taper to cheat perspective. Smartphone screens warp under our thumbs to simulate depth. Advertisements use forced perspective to make burgers look juicier, while museums borrow Gothic light tricks to make paintings glow. The difference: ancient builders wielded deception to elevate the spirit. Today, we're more likely to weaponize it for profit or propaganda, but the antidote is everywhere. Next time you walk through a city, notice how old buildings flirt with your gaze. The way a cornice dips just enough to catch the light, or how a bridge's arch seems to rise as you approach. These aren't accidents, they're echoes of an ancient dialogue between eye and stone. Seek out spaces that unsettle your senses, a stairwell that spirals into impossible geometry, a plaza where shadows paint moving murals at noon. And so we're left with the oldest question of all. Does truth live in the world as it is, or in the world as we perceive it? The temples whisper an answer, that reality and illusion aren't opposites but partners in the dance of meaning. The divine, they suggest, isn't hidden behind the veil, it is the veil. And perhaps that's the greatest deception of all, that in fooling the eye, these spaces didn't obscure the sacred, they revealed it.